My name is Laura, and I just wanted to know more about things like the sentencing circles, the healing circles, how they might help to change the direction of the justice that's happening.
Do you want me to address it?
Your question was about healing circles?
Healing circles and
Alternatives to the criminalization of people, yeah.
With like mics or...
I just wanted to say that being an Aboriginal woman and working at Elizabeth Fry Toronto, and we do have a PAR program, which is that mandated program I was talking about. You know, just being there and as an Aboriginal woman, I'm seeing, like, just seeing the list of names of the women who are waiting for groups. I'm recognizing that almost half of those names are Aboriginal women. So what I've identified, and hopefully that we move forward on, is having more of an Aboriginal specific program where we have elders and it's more empowering and we talk about women's rights and, you know, so we are taking action that way. And that's just my observation being an Aboriginal woman looking at what we're providing at Elizabeth Fry. But, you know, I did identify that we don't have Aboriginal specific programs. So I'm hoping that my presence in the agency and Connie's presence in the agency will create change and provide better service. I don't know if that answers, but that's just one example.
Sorry. Aboriginal Legal Services offers a number of Aboriginal justice or community-based approaches. Some of the things that I think about in terms of the omnibus is what's going to happen with some of those programs. So like our fundamental programs, our community council programs, those likely won't change because in the justice system they're treated sort of as diversions. So they're sanctioned by the court in some respects. Same with anger management groups that we have and circles that we have, both women's, men's, youth. I see those still being effective, but I see that the difference will be in the availability of people accessing those programs based on what they're being charged with and based on what the police are going to charge an individual with and based on what the Crown prosecutor is going to elect how to prosecute.
This is on me.
Here, you can try this one.
All right. Well, I had the pleasure of working with Aboriginal Legal Services several years ago as a youth court worker and for a while in Gladue Court at Old City Hall. And I've also had the experience of seeing the Streetlight program where prostitution-related charges are taken care of, and they call that a diversion program. Now, I'll tell you the difference. Okay, so if you go to Aboriginal Legal Services and you get Native diversion, you get to meet community council members. And they usually make the decision that has something to do with healing, your healing path, something you need to do for your life anyway. Like maybe you need new ID, maybe you need to find housing, maybe you need help with addiction issues. At the Streetlight program, they charge Johns $400 to do a one-day John school, where they basically say a videotape of very bad sexual health infections, and then they have a former sex worker come in and cry and tell them how they've sexually exploited them. Now, in exchange for that $400, which is directly funding the 2-week program the women take, which is consisting of art classes and some computer skills, don't get me wrong, that's important, and promising never to engage in sex work again, versus take some responsibility, do Native diversion, be culturally specific, and not have to say, I'm never going to be a sex worker again, it's awful, it's bad, blah, blah, blah. So out of those two, I'd say that healing programs are really good. So.
I just want to add, because it started with the question on sentencing circles, that people often assume that's a real Native thing, but that actually came out of restorative justice movement, and it kind of gets sold as this Indigenous form of governance. And my personal opinion is that it's very local and very specific to where you are, and there are traditional forms of governance and law that have been practiced and that we can look to and that we have to look to in our specific communities. And there was another question over here.
Thanks very much, and wonderful event. First of all, is your presentation on your website that you were showing this evening?
Mine personally, no. I actually tailored it for tonight.
You couldn't post it, could you? You had some great references.
Oh, yeah, Yeah, and so the whole presentation tonight, I believe, is being posted on the Indigenous Sovereignty site, if I'm correct.
We're not sure yet where we're putting it. The Defenders of the Land possibly.
Right.
We are going to be doing a webcast of this event.
Thank you. And my question is, can you identify any research on data collection? If one were wanting to prove racial profiling, a way to do it would be to count the number of contact cards that police fill out dealing with Aboriginal people, and then trace that to the arrest, to the charges, to the conviction. Are you aware of any research in that area?
Well, there has been one report out of Quebec, and I'm sorry the name of it escapes me, but there has been one report out of Quebec regarding finding statistical information around racial profiling and the effect it has. In Toronto, the Toronto Police Service have been working on a number of things, but one of the things that they take a position on is that you can't, they won't provide the contact cards. So if you, in our clinic side work and the legal advocacy we do on human rights complaints and stuff, very often we seek disclosure on that and they refuse to provide it. And one of their arguments is it's not in the public interest because it would then require them to start asking people their race, all people. Then it would actually, and so their argument is then it would actually encourage. But of course, when you receive police notes, you'll often see notations. Of course, if you saw someone like me and you didn't know my last name, you wouldn't assume I'm Aboriginal. So if I was in the process of being, you know, incarcerated or detained or charged, until they saw my last name, they wouldn't know any difference, so it wouldn't show up on their police notes. So that's one thing that I'm aware of with the Toronto Police Service anyways, is that they're not, that concept around the cards is one that they don't support. The report out of Quebec did actually specifically address, and I do have an English version, so if you Google it online, you talk about Aboriginal people, racial profiling, police, it will pull it up. It's in both English and French. And it was just recently released, I think it was in 2011, but it was early 2011. Sorry.
Hi.
Yeah, they do.
My name's Imran. First, I just want to start off with recognizing my privilege in not having to deal with, you know, the justice system, and having friends have to deal with the justice system until the G20. And that's when I sort of got a sense, even in the discrepancy of how, you know, an Indigenous person was being treated as opposed to some of the other white and other people of color were being treated, and there was a huge discrepancy. So just building on that, so I'm very new to, you know, these issues. I've recognized it, but is there some sort of like coalition or organizations that are, you know, starting to band together? Because this seems to be an issue that, you know, all but the 20 or 25% of the people who actually voted for Harper would be against. You know, you would have the people who enjoy smoking pot. You'll have the people who, you know, you'll have Muslims who have also had to deal with the criminal justice system. You'll have the occupiers. You know, you can have a de-occupy the prisons sort of campaign or coalition happening. You'll have anyone who has, you know, an iota of intelligence seeing that this isn't the right way to deal with the justice system. Is there some sort of coalition, or is there, you know?
If I can start with this one. I'll start with this one. And then hopefully we'll get some more kick in. And I think Audrey could probably answer this question well in some respects. If it's a coalition specific to criminalization or criminal, I'm not sure exactly what, but for instance, there are a number of organizations, and Aboriginal organizations specifically, or coalition of organizations. So for example, Defenders of the Land is one, because we sat here tonight and we talked about Canadian law and the impact Canadian law has on Aboriginal people, but there's Indigenous law, there's Gananoque, so there are groups. There's also the Indigenous Bar Association. Locally, there's service and support groups that work in coalition to push advocacy or change at, say, a municipal level. But I mean, in almost anything you talk about in relation to Aboriginal people's life, there's something at issue. So there's a number of coalitions. To try to list them all or go to them all would be a difficult task, because I mean, in Canada alone, You know, we have communities that don't have clean drinking water. We have communities, Jules, from one where they don't have a high school or a school. We don't have equal access to education. We don't have equal access to job opportunities. We're treated completely different than any other citizen. So the amount of coalitions that could come together and the number of legal issues that we deal with means that you get a lot of various interest groups as opposed to one. And so when it comes to like the criminal law issues, the Canadian criminal law issues, there are coalitions such as like the Indigenous Bar Association. There's Indigenous ones like Defenders of the Land. And so there are a number of coalitions, but there's almost like so many of them out there, and everybody's trying to vie for attention to see what the issues are. And quite frankly, what I have been advocating for at least 20 years is education. Education at a very fundamentally young age, like small school children in this country, province by province, around the true history of Canada. Education when you want to become a citizen of this country, and a booklet, instead of having 3 paragraphs about the Indian people, actually having a whole section on it, having to, you know, learn. So if by educating the current youth, you do make change in the future. But the current education system lacks some truth. And until that truth is there, and all of the materials and information are available, they're right in front of us. We just don't use them. So the biggest coalition or advocacy group that could ever exist would be the education system, so that every person in this country understands exactly what the history is, exactly what all the issues are. Because when you impassion people, they want to make change. When you do it when they're young, they keep going.